That summer the coast wore a blue that seemed to lean closer with every salt wind. I was 10, or maybe 11. The memory, like a lighthouse in fog, refuses to tell the exact year. It was a long stretch of days with only the rhythm of the tide to keep time. High tide, low tide. The moment when the harbour bell would ring for lunch and children would scatter with shirts wet from the sea. Our family had come to stay with grandmother in the old fishing village where the houses breathed with heat in the afternoons and cooled again under the shade of cotton awnings. The days began with the kitchen door yawning open to the morning and the kettle singing softly as if it shared some secret with the sun. Grandmother moved in the doorway like a weathered boat, her apron dusty with flour, her hands stained with onions and the memory of summers long gone. She had a way of saying nothing and letting the air fill with something you could not name until it settled in your chest. The ritual was simple and unarmed. We would walk to the quay at the edge of town, where nets hung like thread curtains on the walls of their little shed. Fish glistened on wooden boards, oilskin coats hung from nails, and gulls stitched the air with their breadcrumb laughter. My father, quiet and tall, walked with us in that half-sunken silence that only a brave man has to carry. 1 foot in the present, one in a memory he never spoke aloud. My mother carried the basket, the bread crust still warm in the bag from the bakery, the scent of salt and yeast spilling out as we opened it. The first morning, a fisherman named Mr. Rao taught me how to tell when a net had seen better days, by the way it sagged against his hands. He had a mouth like weathered wood, and the patient eyes of someone who knew storms by their teeth and breath. He spoke softly, as though the harbour itself might be listening. He talked of patience, of small repairs, of the way a single careful stitch could keep the whole neighbourhood afloat. It was not a grand sermon, but the shape of his voice, low and intimate, with an occasional chuckle, made a shrine out of the seam of the day. Grandmother watched us cross the road to the hillside path that wound up behind the village, where a field of chamomile grew behind the old orchard, and the air tasted of sun-warmed stone and the faint sweetness of crushed grass. There she would lay a blanket and pour us milk into tin cups, the metal cold against our palms, the milk bright and almost pale gold in the sun. The taste of that milk, plain and strong, still clings to memory, as does the sound of grandmother's copper kettle whistling somewhere, unseen, while a cicada clicked its ancient alphabet in the branches. It was in the shade of the orchard that I found a small, almost nothing discovery that would later feel like a hinge in my life. There was a tree I could climb, not high, just enough to tilt my head toward the sky and watch the world from a rung or two above the ground. The tree had a hollow where a colony of sparrows had made their winter home, and inside the hollow lay a smooth, sun-warmed stone that wore a pale sheen from years of rain and wind. I took that stone and tucked it into my pocket, as if it were a coin from a bank I could not yet name. That same afternoon, after grandmother had called us to wash up, we walked back toward the village in a straight line that forgot to be straight, the road winding with the reach of tall bales of hay and the slow hum of bees. The day began to tilt toward evening. The air grew cooler. The buckets of water at the fountain clinked as children drew their baths, and the scent of onion and fried fish drifted from open kitchen doors. It was in this hour that grandmother spoke of the old stories, the ones that lived in the skin of the village, in the drift of nets, in the memory of waves that never quite forgot a name. She told us, not in a loud voice, but as if she were whispering into our ears the truth we needed to hear. That every life has its patient, ordinary work, and that the small acts, mending a net, washing a dish, listening to a child ask a question, and answering with more questions, are how people stay afloat. We slept on cots in the front room that night, and the room smelled of woolen blankets and chalky soap. The window opened to the night, and the village lit up with a quiet shimmer along the shoreline, and the sound of waves pressed softly against the shore, like a memory pressing again upon a life already half forgotten. I lay with my cheek against the pillow, and I kept the sun-warmed stone in my pocket, the rough surface against my thigh, a lucky weight. In the morning, when the bells of the church that stood like a lonely sentinel over the harbour rang, I learned to listen differently. The world did not shout at me with all its colours. It spoke in increments, the rustle of the nets, the soft clack of decking boards under a man's boot, the far-off laughter of children who played hide-and-seek along the quay. I watched how grandmother moved through the kitchen, a place where time slows and the day gathers its breath, kneading dough with a palm that had learned the mathematics of weathered hands, whisking eggs with a rhythm that looked almost ceremonial, as if she were summoning a memory from the bottom of the bowl. The memory took on a shape that was both singular and universal, a life measured not by milestones, but by the cadence of daily kindness. The stone in my pocket became a talisman of patience, a reminder that some truths do not announce themselves in drums and trumpets, but in quiet persistence. The stone wore the feel of sun-warmed pebble, smooth and almost trivial in appearance, yet it carried the weight of a week of mornings and dinners and the close, honest talk of adults who did not pretend to know everything, but did know how to ask the right questions. As the days stretched, I watched grandmother tend to the little garden behind the cottage, the tomatoes that burned red as coins, the beans with their fingers of green tendrils climbing toward the sun, the dill that swayed in the breeze and smelled like summer rain in winter. She did not keep diaries or talk about big dreams, but she kept her family's pace upright, like a boat that will not drift if you tend to its rope's end. She had a way of saying things that were almost a proverb, though she would tell you later that she did not mean to preach, only to remind. Be careful with your courage. It ages when you do not feed it with small deeds. That memory shaped me more than any other, I realize now, because it taught me what a human life could be. A string of ordinary acts that, when gathered, form a pattern strong enough to hold a person through the storms of time. It did not give me a dramatic moment of triumph or a grand revelation, but it kept me honest. It gave me a love of listening. The patient, curious listening that asks questions not to interrupt, but to discover, to learn what another heart has known long before I did. In the years since, when storms raged in the life of a student, or in the quiet of a home after a long illness, I have remembered the way grandmother spoke so softly that the room filled with its own quiet courage. I remembered the harbour's smell, the salt and tar and something faintly green rising with the morning light from the nets hung to dry, and the old bench where the fishermen would sit and trade weather reports, as if the day depended on their shared weather wisdom. I remembered the weight of the stone in my pocket, the way it felt when I reached for it and found it still there, a simple object that had travelled with me through many years. In my own work, I tried to teach the same gentle art, not to fill silence with noise, but to fill it with care, to listen longer than seems useful, to hold space for a child's question, even if the answer could only wait. I learned to see that knowledge was not a